This is another one of those games that isn't content with just telling you that the game's over when you run out of lives, as it actually says, "Game over fighter, your soul is lost," as if simply getting blown to pieces wasn't good enough. So I was recently given a copy of this weird little ancient DOS game called If It Moves, Shoot It, also known by UK gamers as Phantom Fighter. This game is just oozing with budget title quality, and feels like it was put together as fast as humanly possible. And yet at the same time, it does some rather unusual technical tricks not common to DOS gaming. Not to mention, it's a pre-90s game with support for 256 color VGA graphics, despite only using that level of quality for still images. However, its unusual technical tricks has also made it one of the most unstable experiences I've yet encountered running old DOS games emulated in DOSBox, to the point where I'm not even sure if the game's working properly in the footage I've captured. And because of how obscure this game is, I simply haven't been able to confirm much of anything about it. So, judging this game based on my experience with it through DOSBox, I would have to say it's very basic for what it is, with some questionable design decisions, poor sound effects, with decent graphics at least. If It Moves, Shoot It was developed by Emerald Software and originally published for Amiga computers in 1988 by Martek Games. However, the DOS port was published by Broderbund in 1989. It's a one-player 2D shooter with support for CGA 4-color, Tandy 16-color, EGA 16-color, and VGA 256-color graphics, all running at 320x200 resolution. Though I should point out that the VGA mode only runs 256 colors for any still images, and runs 16 colors for the actual gameplay. Thus, the Tandy, EGA, and VGA modes, while playing the actual game, pretty much look all identical. In terms of sound, it only sports the PC speaker, and actually plays some digitized music at the very start. But beyond that, the game pretty much only has two non-digitized PC speaker sound effects for everything you hear. Shooting stuff, and exploding stuff. And that's pretty much it. As for its current release date, it's still commercial but virtually impossible to find. Even if you go looking for its original Amiga release, which was titled Phantom Fighter, you're going to pretty much only run into NES carts of a completely different game, also called Phantom Fighter. This game is about as basic as it gets for a 2D shooter. You control a ship with the arrow keys or a joystick, and you have a fire button. One thing that you'll notice immediately is that there's no auto fire, so it's one of those games where you have to constantly mash the fire button. Unfortunately, it's also very picky about external auto-fire function, as I wasn't able to get any working decently enough, partly because the joystick support in the game isn't very responsive. You start the game off with 7 lives and a very basic laser weapon, which only shoots straight forwards, and looks nothing like a laser, and is fired off-center from your ship. When you destroy certain quantities of enemies, you'll get power-ups to improve your weaponry. However, this process is a bit weird because the balance of each of the different weapons you upgrade between is completely messed up. Your first weapon upgrade is diagonal shots, which fire in 4 diagonal directions, giving you a total attack power of 4. The next upgrade is a double shot, which fires 2 shots forwards. So that's already a drop in attack power back to 2, which is kind of a big deal given that enemies can and will come up from behind you in this game. The next upgrade is a triple shot called Treble for whatever reason, and is probably the best weapon for dealing lots of forward damage against things such as bosses. Next is a homing attack, which you can't really aim as it just sends out energy orbs towards whatever targets it feels like, and won't necessarily hit them. Plus, it doesn't target bosses or mini-bosses, so if you get to the end of a level with the homers, you're pretty much screwed. Although mini-bosses tend to go away after a few moments, so at least you can deal with them just by avoiding them. Now, up to this point, every time you lose a life, you come back to life with the same weapon you had. And up to this point, most of the upgraded weapons have at least some level of improvement over the initial laser weapon. The next upgrade is a side-firing weapon. However, it only shoots a single pulse forwards, and unlike every other weapon in the game, the side-firing pulses are tracked differently, and you can't fire another pair of them until both of the side-firing shots previously fired have cleared the screen. This means the side-firing shots are almost useless, making this weapon only a tiny fraction of attack power better than the lasers you started with. What's worse is that once you get to this point, every time you die, you respawn with this weapon. So this leads to a bit of a conundrum. Some of the simplest weapons to use for raw damage can only be obtained once per run through this game. So you have to make a choice fairly early on if you want to simply upgrade up to a particular pre-side-firing weapon and stick with it, or if you want to upgrade past the side-firing weapon and risk having to return to such a weak weapon every time you die. The next weapon following side-firing is referred to as sweeps, as it shoots a single pulse forwards, but also releases special side-firing pulses which very rapidly shoot more pulses forwards, creating a sweeping effect, and this effect can do a lot of damage. But in terms of direct damage, you're still stuck with just a single forward-firing pulse. The next weapon combines the side pulses with the sweeping pulses, so it's not really any better. The next weapon is called Whack for some reason, and basically gives you a forward-firing pulse, the diagonal pulses, and the side-firing pulses all at once. Unfortunately, because this weapon fires so many different pulses at once, it runs into issues, and sometimes certain pulse types simply won't fire for whatever reason, meaning despite this weapon being extremely powerful, it's also kinda unreliable. The next weapon up is referred to as Friend, where every so often when you fire a shot, a stationary beacon is dropped down which will constantly fire shots forwards for a short while. The final weapon, referred to as the Defender, simply combines a forward-firing shot with homing shots. Yet again, it has the same issues as the Whack weapon, thus sometimes you won't get your homing pulses or your forward-firing pulses when you shoot. If you upgrade past the final weapon, you go back to the side-firing weapon. So, as you can see, the weapons are not well thought out in terms of balance, and often get weaker when upgraded instead of stronger. Plus, the initial few weapons can never be returned to in a run once you pass them. This game serves as a great example as to why 2D shooters with multiple kinds of weapons often give players better control over what kinds of weapons they'll be using, such as the Raiden game cycling the colors of its weapon power-ups, or many of the 2D shooters made by Compile having numbered designations for its weapons. I'm actually already running low on stuff to talk about with this game, as there's not really much to it, just a handful of levels and various different kinds of things to shoot. So let's talk about some of the technical oddities with this game. Let's start with the death transitions, because DOSBox really goes nuts when they happen. If you're running DOSBox full screen, the game will likely lag like crazy trying to do its transitions. And if you run windowed, you're going to notice that the window size goes crazy. This is because the game is somehow able to adjust the EGA screen's timing to create its death effects, which in turn affects what resolution the screen is displayed at. While this looks like simple screen shrinking and pixelating effects emulated, original CRT displays don't tolerate out-of-spec settings, and I imagine what's going on here would look far different on a real non-multisync CRT monitor. As you can imagine though, this also made the game a pain in the butt to record, because most recording solutions, including the one internal to DOSBox, expect a fixed resolution for the entire duration, not a variable resolution which changes rapidly. I eventually found a way to get it working with my streaming software and used that to record it, but again, these transitions are likely to look very different on actual period-specific hardware. Another technical oddity are the still images you see between levels when running in VGA mode. Before starting a new game, you get a particular image transitioned onto the screen, which stays there for a moment, then transitions to itself, then finally goes into the gameplay. I have this strange feeling there's supposed to be text on these screens, but I'm not seeing any. Another reason why I feel this may be the case is because if you run the game in a mode that's not VGA, you'll simply get the title screen with a message saying that the game is loading. Now, I mentioned earlier that this game feels like a budget title, but I don't actually know if it was sold that way or not. Budget titles were common in the UK in the 80s, but were not common at all in North America until the 90s, as we had software distributors instead that would sell discs full of tiny indie games. The off-centered shooting is a part of the reason why I feel the game was put together quickly with no real testing or attention to detail, at least in terms of the gameplay, although there are other reasons too. For instance, if you get hit by an enemy and explode, then immediately get hit by another enemy, you explode again, and it'll continue to explode over and over until you stop getting hit. Also, there's this very strange effect, where as you move downwards, you'll eventually push the status bar out of the way, which might seem like a normal thing to be able to do, but if you leave the status bar pushed away long enough, it'll actually pop back up and quickly push your ship up by about half of the screen. This may seem trivial, but it actually makes it surprisingly difficult to control your ship, since you constantly have to be careful about how close you are to the bottom of the screen. Another oddity is that the original Amiga version of this game not only had top-down levels, but side-scrolling levels as well, whereas this DOS port is completely missing the side-scrolling levels, instead replacing them with top-down levels using the same graphical motifs. Even stranger though, if you look on the back of the box for the DOS version of this game, you'll see a pre-release screenshot of the Amiga version. At least what I assume is a pre-release screenshot, as it doesn't look anything like the actual Amiga version and was likely used as a reference for porting this game. Which may explain why the two versions differ as much as they do. Heck, even the weapons are different in the Amiga version from what I've looked up. Or if not completely different, just named differently. The last thing I want to address is the difficulty. This game's pretty difficult, but it isn't very long. It doesn't have any random chance to it. So it doesn't take long to learn what enemies are going to come from where and how best to deal with them. In fact, one extremely good tip I can give to anyone who owns this game or gets the opportunity to play it is that every single shot fired by any enemies in this game can only move at 45-degree angles. By taking this into consideration, it becomes much easier to find neutral spots you can park your ship into and completely avoid getting hit. Plus, it makes it much easier to dodge shots in general, since you can always assume two shots moving near each other aren't going to get any closer or further apart. Overall, this game's kind of a mess, really. It does weird technical things which makes it hard to know if it's being accurately emulated or not. It doesn't control very well with a joystick or gamepad, it isn't much better with a keyboard, has lackluster audio, completely imbalanced weapons, and clearly wasn't tested all too much before being released. In fact, this is probably the worst thing I've ever seen come out of Broderbund, which makes me wonder how they were convinced to publish it in the first place. On the plus side, the graphics are very imaginative and colorful, and for as badly made as the game is, it's at least playable. So, yeah, it's a below average game. It could be worse, but it could be a lot better too. Not something I'd recommend people go out of their way to try out, but given its obscurity and rarity, it'd probably make for an interesting collector's item with the box and everything. Though, as it stands, all I have are the discs. The game does work with the auto or max cycle settings, but I find given the weird things this game does internally, it seems to run more stable when using a fixed cycles count. So I recommend a setting of 10,000. Other than that, I tried a whole mess of settings to see if I can make it run even better, and just ended up insta-crashing the thing most of the time. Or on one attempt with the Tandy graphics, I managed to really screw the graphics up, which unfortunately I didn't get captured on video. So yeah, the game didn't like my attempts to make it emulate better. Anywho, that's all for this episode of Ancient DOS Games. Episode 183 will be next Saturday, and we're going to be taking a look at a rather old game about cats. Believe it or not, there's not very many games that could be, so be sure to send your guests as soon as you can to adg@pixelships.com and stay tuned to see what I've got in store for you all.